The galaxy had forgotten about Earth. 300 years ago, the Empire stretched across 9,000 star systems. Their ships moved like silver serpents through the darkness between worlds. Their technology could reshape planets and build stations the size of moons. They had conquered species that lived in fire and races that breathed poison. Nothing could stand against their might. When their scout vessels first arrived in the Sol system, they found a small blue planet filled with primitive creatures. Humans were still fighting among themselves with chemical weapons and nuclear threats. They had barely touched their own moon. Their radio signals leaked into space like the crying of infants. The commanders looked at Earth and saw nothing of value. But the Empire needed workers. They needed hands to mine asteroids in dangerous belts. They needed bodies to clean the toxic atmospheres of conquered worlds. They needed slaves to maintain the great engines that powered their civilization. So they took humans by the millions. The great ships descended through Earth's atmosphere in the year 2157. Cities burned, armies fell, governments collapsed in hours. The humans fought back with everything they had, but their missiles bounced off energy shields that could withstand the heat of stars. Their tanks melted under weapons that operated on principles they could not even name. Resistance was not just futile, it was laughable. It took 20 million humans in that first harvest. They scattered them across their empire like seeds thrown into darkness. Human slaves worked in the depths of mining stations where temperatures could freeze blood in seconds. Human servants cleaned the palaces of nobles who lived for thousands of years. Human soldiers were sent to fight in proxy wars on distant worlds, dying for causes they did not understand against enemies they had never seen. Earth was left behind. They placed warning beacons around the Sol system and marked it as a protected breeding ground. They would return every 50 years to harvest more workers. The planet was nothing more than a farm to them, a source of cheap labor, a footnote in their great imperial records. Commander stood on the bridge of his observation vessel and watched the data streams flowing across his screens. He was old even by standards, his silver scales dulled by centuries of service to the Empire. His 3 eyes blinked slowly as he processed the information that had been gathered over the past rotation. "This cannot be accurate," he said. His voice carried the weight of disbelief. His second officer, a younger named, moved to stand beside him. "The probes have the reading 17 times, Commander. The data is correct." Turned one of his eyes toward while keeping the other 2 fixed on the screens. "You are telling me that the primitive world has developed faster-than-light capability." "Not just capability, Commander. They have built ships, many ships." The old commander felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of military service. He felt uncertain. The humans had been left alone for barely a century. When the Empire had collapsed in the Great Burning, when the Civil War had torn their civilization apart and destroyed 7,000 star systems, the monitoring of primitive worlds had simply stopped. There had been no one left to care about a small breeding farm on the edge of dead space. "Show me the visual feed," ordered. The main screen flickered and changed. Instead of data streams, it now showed an image that made both freeze and shock. Where once there had been a single inhabited planet and a barren moon, there was now something else entirely. The space around Earth was filled with structures. Massive stations hung in orbit like mechanical continents. Shipyards stretched for thousands of kilometers, their skeletal frames embracing vessels in various stages of construction. Defense platforms bristled with weapons that they could not immediately identify. And ships. There were so many ships. They moved through the darkness in organized patterns, their hulls gleaming with lights that spoke of power and purpose. "They were supposed to be primitive," whispered. "They were supposed to take 10,000 years to reach this level of development." "They were abandoned," replied quietly, "and they did not waste their time." The old commander understood now. When the Empire fell, when their great civilization tore itself apart in a war that lasted 50 years and killed trillions, no one had thought about the slave worlds. No one had remembered the breeding farms. The humans had been left alone with the wreckage of crashed ships, with fragments of technology that they should not have been able to understand. They had been given darkness and silence and the memory of their suffering. And they had built something from that pain. Admiral Sarah stood in the command center of humanity's first true battleship, the Remembrance. She was 62 years old, with gray streaking through her black hair and lines carved deep around her eyes. Those eyes had seen things that no human from the old Earth could have imagined. She had been born on a mining station in the outer belt, the granddaughter of slaves who had been taken in the second harvest. Her parents had died in the uprising that freed the belt stations from the automated systems they had left behind. Now she commanded a fleet that would have made the old nations of Earth weep with pride and terror in equal measure. "Admiral, we have confirmed contact." Lieutenant Commander James's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "Observation vessel, single ship, no escort." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "They came alone. That tells us something important." "What does it tell us, Admiral?" "That they still do not understand what we have become." Sarah walked to the central display and studied the holographic representation of their solar system. The single ship was positioned near Jupiter, probably using one of the gas giant's moons for sensor cover. It was a small vessel by the standards of what the Empire had once fielded. During the harvests, they had sent carriers the size of cities. This observation ship was barely larger than one of humanity's destroyers. "They are scanning us," reported the sensor officer. "High-powered sweeps. They are trying to count our vessels and analyze our technology." "Let them look," Sarah said. "Let them see everything they need to see, and then open a communication channel." The bridge fell silent. This moment had been planned for decades. This moment had been the dream of every human who had worked and bled and died to build the fleet that now defended their world. First contact with the beings who had enslaved their ancestors. First words spoken between humanity and the monsters who had stolen 20 million souls. "Channel open, Admiral." Sarah straightened her uniform and faced the main screen. "Vessel, this is Admiral Sarah of the Human Defense Force. You are in sovereign human space. State your intentions or be destroyed." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then the screen flickered, and the face of Commander appeared. His three eyes were wide with what Sarah recognized as confusion. The old creature had probably never been spoken to in such a manner by any species, let alone one that had been marked as cattle. You speak the Imperial tongue," said slowly. "How do you know our language?" "We learned many things from the remains of your people and your technology that were left behind," Sarah replied coldly. "We learned your language. We learned your science. We learned how to build ships that can travel faster than light. And we learned exactly what you did to our ancestors." Scales shifted in a pattern that indicated discomfort. "The harvests were conducted according to imperial law. Your species was designated as suitable for labor assignment. There was nothing personal in the—" "Nothing personal." Sarah's voice cut through the translation systems like a blade. "You stole millions of our people. You worked them to death in your mines. You forced them to fight in your wars. You treated them as property for 300 years, and you call this nothing personal." "You must understand," began, "the Empire has fallen. The people are scattered across the remnants of our territory. We no longer have the power to. We know exactly what happened to your empire." Sarah took a step closer to the screen. "We have been watching. We have been listening. We have spent the last century preparing for this moment. And now you appear in our system, alone and weak, expecting us to be the same primitive creatures you abandoned." The old commander's three eyes blinked rapidly. "What do you want from us?" Sarah smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "We want nothing from you. We are simply informing you of a new reality. The Sol system and all territory within 50 light-years of our star is now claimed by the Human Federation. Any vessel that enters our space without permission will be destroyed. Any attempt to conduct another harvest will be met with the complete annihilation of whoever is foolish enough to try. You cannot possibly hope to stand against us, said, but his voice lacked conviction. Even in our weakened state, we still command thousands of ships. We still possess technology that is centuries ahead of. Look at your sensor readings, Commander. Look at what we have built in the century since your empire left us behind. Count our ships, analyze our weapons, and then ask yourself if you truly wish to test our resolve. Was silent for a long moment. His scales shifted through several colors that Sarah did not recognize, emotions that the translator could not interpret. Finally, he spoke again. I will bring this information to the Remnant Council. They will decide how to respond to this development. Tell your council one more thing, Sarah said. Tell them that we remember. We remember every ship that came to harvest us. We remember every hand that was raised against our people. We remember the names of the worlds where our ancestors died as slaves. And we remember that we were promised nothing but darkness and suffering. Tell them that we built light from that darkness. Tell them that we forged strength from that suffering. And tell them that if they ever want to see what true darkness looks like, they need only threaten our world again. The communication ended. Face vanished from the screen, replaced by the tactical display showing the vessel turning and accelerating toward the edge of the system. Lieutenant Commander released a breath he had been holding. Do you think they will attack, Admiral? Sarah watched the blinking dot that represented the retreating enemy ship. Not today, probably not even this year, but they will come eventually. What they saw here will spread through whatever remains of their civilization. Some will fear us, some will want to reclaim us, and some will simply refuse to believe that the cattle have grown teeth. Will we be ready? Sarah turned to face her bridge crew. These were the descendants of survivors. Their grandparents had been taken in chains from a world that no longer resembled the one they had left. Their parents had been born in captivity, had fought and died for freedom that many of them never lived to see. And now their children stood on the bridges of warships that could challenge the beings who had once treated them as livestock. We have spent 100 years preparing for this moment, Sarah said. We built our fleet in secret, hiding our true strength behind asteroid fields and gas giants. We trained our soldiers in the arts of war that we learned from our captors and the new tactics we developed ourselves. We created weapons that even they at their height would have feared. We did all of this knowing that one day they would return, and on that day we would have to prove that we are no longer prey. She paused and looked at each face in turn. They abandoned us because they thought we were worthless. They left us to breed like animals in a cage, waiting for the next harvest. They never imagined that we could become something more. That was their mistake. And when they finally understand the full extent of that mistake, they will learn what happens when you push humanity into the shadows and expect us to stay there. The bridge crew stood taller. Their eyes burned with the same fire that had driven their ancestors to survive impossible conditions, to learn forbidden knowledge, to build in secret what they would one day need to fight. We claimed the void, Sarah continued. We made the darkness our home, and now we will show the galaxy that humanity is not a species to be harvested. We are a species to be feared. Far across the galaxy, in a system that had once been the heart of a great empire, the Remnant Council gathered to hear Commander's report. The council chamber was a shadow of what it had once been. Where thousands of nobles had once sat in glory, only 47 representatives remained. The great pillars were cracked. The crystal windows that had once displayed the light of a captured star were dark and cold. High Counselor Mar listened to the old commander's words with growing unease. His scales had faded to a dull gray over his long life, and his 3 eyes could no longer see as clearly as they once had. But he heard everything that reported, and he understood the implications better than most. You are telling me that the humans have achieved faster-than-light travel, Mar said slowly, that they have built a fleet, that they have claimed territory. Yes, High Counselor, they have done all of this and more. In less than a century. Bowed his head. In less than a century. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted at each other, their scales flashing through colors that indicated fear, anger, and disbelief. Some called for immediate military action. Some demanded that the humans be destroyed before they could become a greater threat. Others argued that the remnant could not afford another war, that they should negotiate, that they should find a way to incorporate these new humans into whatever structure remained of their civilization. Mar raised one withered hand, and the chamber fell silent. His authority was one of the few things that still held the remnant together, and even the most aggressive voices would not speak over him. Commander, the High Counselor said, you spent time observing these humans. You spoke with their leader. What is your assessment of the threat they pose? The old commander stood silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He had served the Empire for 300 years. He had fought in wars against species that controlled black holes and civilizations that lived in the hearts of stars. He had seen wonders and horrors beyond description, but what he had witnessed in the Sol system was something different. High Counselor, with respect, I do not believe we should think of the humans as a threat to be assessed. I believe we should think of them as a force to be reckoned with. They built their fleet in secret, hiding from our observation systems that we thought were still active. They reverse-engineered our technology in decades when it should have taken them. And they did all of this while knowing that we might return at any moment to harvest them again. What does this tell you? Mar asked. It tells me that we made a terrible mistake when we abandoned that world. We left them with nothing but pain and the memory of what we did to them. We gave them every reason to hate us and every motivation to prepare for our return. And now they have spent 100 years doing exactly that. Every ship they built, every weapon they created, every tactic they developed was done with one purpose in mind. They were preparing for the day when they would have to fight us. The council chamber was silent. The weight of words hung in the air like the shadow of a dying star. What do you recommend? Mar finally asked. Looked around the chamber at the remnants of what had once been the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. 47 representatives from 47 surviving systems. A fraction of the power they had once commanded. A shadow of the glory they had once possessed. I recommend that we remember who we are, the old commander said. And I recommend that we consider very carefully whether we want to create an enemy that will never stop until we are completely destroyed. Because that is what the humans have become. They are not cattle anymore. They are not slaves. They are survivors who have turned their suffering into strength. And if we push them again, they will push back with everything they have. The debate continued for hours, then days, then weeks. The Remnant Council could not agree on how to respond to the new reality in the Sol system. Some factions wanted war. Some wanted peace. Some wanted to simply ignore the humans and hope that they would not expand beyond their claimed territory. But while they debated and argued and struggled to find consensus, humanity continued to prepare. Ships were built. Soldiers were trained. Alliances were formed with other species that had suffered under rule. The void that had once been a prison became a pathway to power. And in the shadows of the galaxy, other eyes watched and waited. Other species that had been conquered and abandoned. Other civilizations that had been harvested and forgotten. They saw what humanity had accomplished in a single century, and they began to hope that perhaps they too could rise from the ashes of their suffering. The Empire had abandoned tomorrow, but from the shadows, humanity was claiming the void, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. Admiral Sarah stood alone on the observation deck of the Remembrance, watching the stars that had once been symbols of captivity and despair. Now they represented something else. They represented possibility. They represented territory. They represented the future that humanity would carve for itself in the infinite darkness of space. She thought about her grandparents, who had been taken from Earth in chains. She thought about her parents, who had died fighting for freedom. She thought about the millions of humans who still lived in the systems beyond their claimed territory, descendants of slaves who had never known there. "We are coming for you," she whispered to the distant stars. "Every single one of you, we will find you, we will free you, and we will bring you home." The stars did not answer, but somewhere in the void, in systems that bore the scars of occupation, humans lifted their eyes to the sky and felt something they had not felt in generations. They felt hope. The first phase of humanity's emergence from the shadows was complete. They had declared themselves to the galaxy. They had warned their former masters that the age of harvesting was over. They had drawn a line in the void and dared anyone to cross it. But this was only the beginning. The true test was still to come. The Remnant Council would eventually make a decision, and when they did, humanity would have to prove that their words were more than empty threats. They would have to prove that the species which had once been cattle could stand against the species which had once been gods. In shipyards across the Sol system, construction continued around the clock. In training facilities on Mars and Europa and Titan, soldiers prepared for battles that might not come for years or might come tomorrow. In research stations hidden in the asteroid belt, scientists worked on weapons and technologies that would give humanity every possible advantage in the conflicts to come. And in the hearts of every human who knew the truth about their history, a fire burned that would never be extinguished. The fire of memory, the fire of determination, the fire of a species that had been pushed into the darkness and had emerged from it stronger than ever before. The Empire had abandoned tomorrow, but humanity had claimed it back. And they were just getting started. 7 months passed since the observation ship fled the Sol system, 7 months of silence from the Remnant Council, 7 months of tension that coiled with each passing day. Humanity did not waste this time. They could not afford to. Admiral Sarah stood in the war room of Fleet Command on Luna, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the disposition of every human ship in existence. The fleet had grown since that first confrontation. 23 new destroyers had completed their trials. 4 more battleships had joined the Remembrance in the first combat squadron. And the prototype carriers, those massive vessels that could deploy hundreds of fighters and bombers, were finally ready for their maiden voyages. "Intelligence reports from our listening posts near the border," said General Stone, commander of the ground forces. He was a tall man with skin as dark as the void between stars and eyes that had seen too many battlefields. "They are mobilizing. At least 60 ships of various classes have been spotted moving toward staging points." Sarah studied the display showing the predicted enemy movement. 60 ships, that is less than I expected. "The Remnant is weakened," Stone replied. "They cannot field the armadas that the old Empire once commanded, but even 60 warships represent a significant threat. Their technology is still superior to ours in many ways." "In some ways," Sarah corrected. "We have spent 100 years studying their systems and finding their weaknesses. We know how their shields work and how to overload them. We know that their targeting systems struggle with our jamming frequencies. We know that their hull materials are vulnerable to certain radiation types that we have incorporated into our warheads. They think they know what we are capable of, but they only saw a fraction of what we have built." Stone nodded slowly. "When do you think they will attack?" "Within the month. They will not give us more time to prepare. Every day that passes makes us stronger and them more uncertain." Sarah turned to face the assembled officers who had gathered for this briefing. "We have trained for this. We have built for this. Every ship in our fleet, every weapon we have created, every tactic we have developed has been designed for this moment. They are coming to teach us our place. We are going to show them that our place is wherever we choose to stand." The officers saluted and dispersed to their commands. Sarah remained alone in the war room, studying the displays that showed the fragile bubble of human-controlled space surrounded by the vast darkness of the galaxy. 50 light-years of territory, a handful of star systems, mining operations and research stations, and the beginnings of colonies on worlds that had never known human feet. It was not much compared to the thousands of systems the Still controlled, but it was theirs. They had built it from nothing, from the ashes of slavery and the determination of survivors, and they would defend it with everything they had. The attack came 18 days later. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, their ships appearing like silver ghosts against the backdrop of distant stars. There were 63 vessels in total, led by a massive command carrier that dwarfed anything humanity had yet built. At the head of this force was War Admiral, a veteran of the Civil War that had destroyed the old empire, and one of the most decorated military commanders in history. Stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical displays update with information about the human defense forces. His 4 arms were crossed behind his back, and his 3 eyes moved constantly, analyzing every detail. They have positioned their fleet in a defensive formation near the 4th planet, reported his tactical officer. Approximately 90 vessels of various classes. 90 vessels. His voice carried a note of contempt. Built from scraps of our technology by creatures that were herding animals when my grandfather walked these decks. Send a message to their commander. Tell them that if they surrender now, I will be merciful. Their leaders will be executed quickly, and the rest of the population will be returned to labor assignments rather than exterminated. The message was sent. The response came within minutes. Admiral Sarah's face appeared on the main screen. She looked calm, almost relaxed, as she addressed the War Admiral. War Admiral, I have received your offer of mercy. Let me give you my response. She leaned forward slightly, and her eyes held a fire that made even the battle-hardened hesitate. There will be no surrender. There will be no return to slavery. Every human in this system will fight you until their last breath, and even then they will curse you with their dying words. You can destroy our ships. You can burn our cities. You can kill every single one of us, but you will never ever see us kneel again. We have tasted freedom. We have built lives of our own choosing, and we would rather die as free humans than live as property. Sarah paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was ice and steel combined. You have entered our space without permission. You have threatened our people with death and enslavement. Under human law, this is an act of war, and under human law, acts of war are answered with fire. You have 1 hour to withdraw your forces from the Sol system. If you remain after that time, we will destroy you. The communication ended. Stood motionless for a moment, processing what he had just witnessed. No conquered species had ever spoken to an officer in such a manner. No cattle had ever dared to threaten the masters who had harvested them. They are bluffing, he decided. They cannot possibly believe they can stand against us. Launch fighters and begin the approach. We will crush this rebellion before it can spread to other slave populations. The fleet began its advance. Fighters poured from the carrier bays like silver insects, forming attack wings that moved ahead of the capital ships. The formation was textbook doctrine, designed to overwhelm enemy defenses with sheer numbers while the heavy ships provided fire support. Sarah watched the enemy approach on her tactical display. Status report. All ships report ready, Admiral. Fighter wings are standing by. Defense platforms are online. Ground-based batteries are tracking targets. And the surprise. Lieutenant Commander allowed himself a small smile. Charging and ready on your command. They were halfway to Mars when they began to realize that something was wrong. Their sensors were detecting energy signatures that did not match any known human technology. Strange readings were emanating from what appeared to be dead asteroids in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. And the human fleet, instead of forming a defensive screen around their planet, was beginning to move in patterns that looked almost like an encirclement. War Admiral, the sensor officer called out, we are detecting multiple contacts emerging from the asteroid field. 2040, 70+ vessels. Scales rippled with the first sign of concern. 70 vessels, where did they come from? They were hidden, War Admiral. We are also detecting energy spikes from what we thought were inactive stations. They appear to be weapons platforms. The tactical display updated, and felt something he had not experienced since the darkest days of the Civil War. He felt the cold touch of genuine fear. The humans had hidden their true strength. The 90 ships they had shown were not their entire fleet. They were just the visible portion, the bait that would draw them into what was rapidly becoming a trap. Now the hidden forces were emerging, cutting off the retreat routes and surrounding the invaders in a web of firepower. "All ships prepare for combat maneuvers," ordered, his voice steady despite the dread spreading through his hearts. "Focus fire on the nearest human vessels. We will punch through their line and—" The first volley struck before he could finish the sentence. Human weapons were not supposed to be this powerful. Human shields were not supposed to hold against fire. Human tactics were not supposed to be this coordinated, this precise, this devastatingly effective. But the battle that unfolded in the darkness around Mars shattered every assumption they had held about their former slaves. The human ships fought with a fury that bordered on madness. Destroyers dived into knife-fighting range where their rapid-fire weapons could hammer hulls faster than shields could regenerate. Cruisers launched waves of missiles that used frequencies the point defense systems could not track. And the battleships, those great vessels that humanity had built in secret, unleashed weapons that tore through armor like paper through flame. But the most devastating blows came from the weapons platforms hidden in the asteroid belt. They were massive devices, each one the size of a small moon, and they fired beams of energy that could slice a cruiser in half with a single shot. They had never encountered weapons like these because they did not exist anywhere else in the galaxy. Humanity had invented them. Watched his fleet being torn apart and understood that he had been wrong about everything. The humans had not just reverse-engineered technology. They had improved it. They had innovated beyond it. They had created weapons and tactics that no commander had ever faced because no such weapons and tactics had ever existed before. "War Admiral, we have lost 18 ships. Another 12 are crippled. The humans are pushing us toward the outer system." "Signal the retreat," said. The words tasted like poison, but he had no choice. "All ships, emergency faster than light jump. Get us out of here." The surviving vessels began to spin up their FTL drives, desperate to escape the slaughter. But the humans had anticipated this as well. Their ships had been maneuvering throughout the battle, and now they held positions that made it impossible for them to establish clear jump trajectories without passing through overlapping fields of fire. 23 more ships were destroyed trying to escape. The rest, barely half of the original force, managed to make random jumps that scattered them across light years of space. The Eternal Dominion was among the survivors, but just barely. Its hull was with weapon impacts, and 2 of its 4 engine pods were completely destroyed. Stood alone on his damaged bridge, surrounded by the bodies of officers who had served him for centuries. His scales had turned the color of ash, the expression of deepest shame. He had led his fleet into what he had assumed would be an easy victory, and he had been crushed by creatures that his people had once considered barely worthy of being used as labor. "Send a message to the Remnant Council," he said quietly to the surviving communications officer. "Tell them that the Sol system is lost. Tell them that the humans have weapons we cannot counter and tactics we cannot predict. And tell them that we have made an enemy that will not stop until they have destroyed everything we have left." The message was sent, and across the galaxy, in chambers and council rooms and military headquarters, the remnant began to understand that the universe had changed in ways they could not comprehend. The humans had won their first battle against their former masters, but for Sarah and the rest of humanity, this was not a moment of celebration. It was a moment of determination. 2 years after the Battle of Mars, human ships entered the system for the first time. This was one of the worlds where human slaves had been sent after the harvests, a mining colony where generations of workers had lived and died extracting precious metals from asteroid belts that surrounded a dying star. The overseers had fled when they learned that human warships were coming. They had not bothered to take the slaves with them. Admiral stood in the command center of the carrier Liberation as her ships secured the system. Shuttle after shuttle descended to the mining stations, carrying troops and medical personnel, and something far more important than either. They carried freedom. The humans had never seen Earth. Most of them had been born in the depths of mining facilities, breathing recycled air and eating processed nutrients that barely kept them alive. They knew of their only through stories passed down from grandparents who had been taken in the harvests, legends of blue skies and green lands and the warmth of a yellow sun. When the shuttles opened and they saw humans in uniforms bearing the flag of the Human Federation, they did not know how to react. Some wept. Some fell to their knees. Some could only stare in disbelief at the impossible sight before them. Sarah was on one of those shuttles. She had insisted on being present for this moment, the first time that humanity would reunite with its lost children. She stepped onto the deck of the main mining station and looked at the crowd of thin, exhausted faces that had gathered to meet her. "My name is Admiral Sarah," she said. "I am the commander of the Human Federation Defense Force, and I am here to tell you that you are slaves no longer." An old woman pushed through the crowd, her body bent from decades of labor and her eyes clouded with cataracts. She reached out with trembling hands and touched Sarah's face, as if making sure that she was real. "You came from Earth?" the old woman asked. "From the world they took us from." "I came from Earth," Sarah confirmed, "and I came to bring you home." The old woman began to cry. It was the cry of someone who had spent her entire life hopping for something that she had been told was impossible, only to discover that the impossible had become real. Others joined her, and soon the entire station was filled with the sounds of weeping and laughter and names being called out as families separated across generations began to find each other. This scene repeated itself across the galaxy over the following years. Human fleets pushed deeper into what had once been territory, liberating slave populations on world after world. Some systems surrendered without a fight when they saw the size of the approaching forces. Others required battles that cost lives on both sides, but the result was always the same. The slaves were freed, they were driven out, and humanity's territory grew larger with each passing month. The Remnant Council watched their remaining empire crumble with growing desperation. They tried to negotiate, but humanity refused to accept any terms that did not include the complete cessation of slavery and the release of all human captives. They tried to form alliances with other species that had grievances against humanity, but found that most of those species were too afraid of the humans to risk their anger. They tried to develop new weapons that could counter the human innovations, but their research programs had been crippled by the Civil War, and they could not match the pace of human technological advancement. High Counselor Mar, now ancient even by standards, called a final meeting of the Remnant Council in the ruins of their once great capital. The chamber that had once held thousands now held only 23 representatives, and most of them looked as broken and worn as the pillars that supported the crumbling ceiling. "We have received terms from the Human Federation," Mar announced. "They are offering us a choice." "What choice?" demanded one of the younger representatives. "What choice do cattle offer to their former masters?" "They are not cattle," Mar replied quietly. "They have not been cattle for a very long time. Perhaps they never were." The old counselor activated a display showing the terms that humanity had transmitted. "They are offering us survival. We may keep a portion of our remaining territory, enough to maintain a viable civilization. We must release all human captives immediately. We must pay reparations to the freed populations over the course of the next century. We must reduce our military forces to defensive levels only. And we must formally acknowledge that the harvests were a crime against the human species. Acknowledge that we committed crimes. The younger representative's scales flashed with outrage. Against creatures we raised from primitives, against a species we gave the gift of space travel. You gave them nothing. The voice came from the doorway, and every in the chamber turned to see who had spoken. A human woman stood there, flanked by guards wearing the uniform of the Federation Marine Corps. She was tall and dark-skinned, with gray streaking through her hair and eyes that had seen more battles than most could imagine. Admiral Sarah walked into the chamber as if she owned it, and in a very real sense, she did. Human ships held every approach to this system. Human soldiers had secured the planet. The Remnant Council existed only because humanity had chosen to let it exist, at least for now. Admiral, Mar said. He was the only one in the chamber who did not seem surprised by her appearance. I assume you are here to ensure that we accept your terms. I am here to give you one final opportunity to understand what you did, Sarah replied. You speak of gifts and cattle and the natural order of things. You still believe that you were right to take us, to enslave us, to treat us as property to be used and discarded. She walked to the center of the chamber and looked around at the remnants of what had once been a galactic empire. Let me tell you what you actually did. You found a species that was on the verge of destroying itself with its own weapons. You found creatures who fought each other over territory and resources and ideas. You found beings who had split the atom and touched their moon and were reaching for the stars with their own hands. And you decided that we were nothing, that we were useful only as labor. That our lives and our dreams and our potential meant nothing compared to the minerals we could dig out of your asteroids. Sarah's voice hardened. You were wrong. We took your technology and made it better. We took your ships and built fleets that could destroy your armadas. We took your arrogance and turned it into fuel for our own determination. Everything you thought you knew about us was wrong, and now you are paying the price for your blindness. She turned to face Mar directly. You have one chance to survive as a species. Accept these terms. Release our people. Acknowledge what you did. And pray that we choose to honor the agreement, because if we decide that peace is not worth more than vengeance, there is nothing in this galaxy that can stop us from wiping you out completely. The chamber was silent. The who had once ruled 9,000 star systems sat in their crumbling council room and faced the representative of a species they had dismissed as worthless. Mar rose slowly from his seat. He was ancient, his scales faded and his eyes dim, but his voice was steady. We accept the terms, all of them. The younger representative started to protest, but Mar silenced him with a gesture. We accept because we have no choice. We accept because we were wrong. And we accept because perhaps, in the ashes of our empire, we might learn something from the species we tried to destroy. We might learn how to survive when everything we believed has been proven false. He turned to Sarah. What will you do now, Admiral? You have defeated us. You have freed your people. You have claimed the void that we once ruled. What comes next for humanity? Sarah considered the question. It was the question that every human would face in the years to come. They had built their civilization on the foundation of resistance and survival. Now that the immediate threat was ended, what would they become? We will grow, she said finally. We will explore. We will meet other species and learn from them and teach them what we have learned. We will build colonies on worlds that have never known human feet and stations around stars that we have not yet named. We will make mistakes and suffer setbacks and face challenges that we cannot yet imagine. She paused and looked around the chamber one final time. But we will never forget where we came from. We will never forget the darkness that forged us. And we will never, ever allow anyone to put us in chains again. That is what comes next for humanity. That is what we will build from the void that you abandoned. Admiral Sarah walked out of the chamber, leaving the remnants of the empire to contemplate their future. Outside, her shuttle waited to take her back to her fleet, to her people, to the civilization that they were building among the stars. The Empire had abandoned tomorrow. They had left humanity in the shadows and assumed that the darkness would consume them. They had been so certain of their superiority that they could not imagine any other outcome. They had been wrong. From the shadows, humanity had risen. From the ashes of slavery, they had built something new. From the void that their captors had left them, they had claimed a future that no one had believed possible. And as human ships spread across the galaxy, carrying the children of Earth to worlds that their ancestors could never have imagined, a single truth echoed through the darkness between stars. Humanity had come back from the shadows, and they had claimed the void as their own. Forever,